Imagine a man standing in the sun-drenched court of Emperor Tiberius, clutching nothing more than a simple drinking bowl. To the guards and advisors watching, it looks like ordinary glass, delicate, translucent, and prone to shattering at the slightest stumble. Then, without warning, the inventor hurls the bowl onto the stone floor. You'd expect the sharp, crystalline ring of 1,000 shards hitting the ground. Instead, there is only a heavy, dull thud. The bowl isn't broken, it's merely dented, as if it were made of soft lead or rubber. As the room falls silent, the inventor calmly pulls a small hammer from his belt and taps the glass back into its original shape. It is perfect again. He looks up, likely expecting to be showered with gold or granted a title for discovering flexible glass, a material that shouldn't exist for another 2,000 years. But then the atmosphere in the room shifts. Tiberius doesn't look amazed, he looks deeply unsettled, almost afraid. He asks one quiet question. Does anyone else know your secret? When the inventor proudly replies that he is the only one, the emperor doesn't reach for a reward. He signals his guards to take the man away and have him executed on the spot. In the emperor's mind, if glass could be made indestructible, the value of the empire's gold and silver would vanish overnight. To save the economy, he chose to bury the genius. That instantaneous transition from the peak of human innovation to a state-ordered execution left a hole in history that we still haven't filled. It's a chilling reminder that throughout time, we haven't just progressed, we've forgotten. We are surrounded by impossible objects, cups that change color using nanotechnology before the word existed, and computers found in ancient shipwrecks that predate the modern version by a millennium. It makes you wonder how much of our modern world is actually just us finally catching up to the ghosts of the past.
That story, it really hits you, doesn't it? It just lands with this thud, just like the bowl.
As it really sets the stage for what we want to get into today.
It really does, because it just completely undermines that idea we all have, that story we're told about history being this clean, upward line of progress.
Yeah, a straight arrow pointing up.
Exactly. We started with sticks and stones, we figured out the wheel, and then it was a smooth ride all the way to Silicon Valley. But this story suggests something much darker. Much more complicated.
It's messy. The line of progress is jagged. It goes up, sure, but it also goes sideways, and sometimes it just falls off a cliff.
And that's the core of our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and look at those moments where history dropped off a cliff. We're going to examine these specific artifacts, these theories, these pieces of evidence that suggest the ancient world had these pockets of incredible knowledge.
Right. Not just, basic masonry. We're talking about things that sound like science fiction.
We really are. Things like nanotechnology, complex computing, maybe even energy harvesting. And we're going to look at how that knowledge was either lost or, and this is the really chilling part, maybe it was actively suppressed.
And to do that, we've pulled from a really wide range of sources. This isn't just one perspective. We've got the classical historians, right? The people who were there, like Pliny and Cassius Dio.
Yeah, the eyewitness accounts. But we're also going to ground this in modern hard science. We're looking at analysis from places like the Smithsonian, research papers published in journals like Nature.
And then we're going to wade into the, let's say, the wilder side of the internet.
Chuckles, the deep end of the pool.
Exactly. We've gone through some really fascinating Reddit threads, looked at alternative history forums. We're going to talk about the Tartarian Empire, about mud floods, about this idea of a global reset.
So it's a mix. You've got the museum artifact, you've got the scientific paper, and you've got the late night conspiracy theory. And the truth, if we can find it, is probably somewhere in the middle of all three.
I think so too. And we're going to keep it grounded in physical objects, things you can actually go and see. These aren't just stories.
No, these are artifacts that are sitting in museums right now, baffling scientists.
So let's start with the first one. It's an object that really challenges our idea of ancient craftsmanship. To get us in the right mindset, I want you to imagine something.
Okay, I'm with you.
Picture a glassmaker in the 4th century. We'll call him Decimus. He's in his workshop, it's dim, it smells like smoke and chemicals, and to everyone else, he's just another guy making fancy cups for rich Romans. But he's not. He's obsessed with what he calls the breath of stones.
The breath of stone.
He doesn't think matter is dead. He thinks it's alive, that can be tuned, like an instrument. So he's not just mixing glass, he's manipulating it on a level that nobody understands. He's trying to make it interact with atmospheric frequencies.
So he's not a craftsman, he's more like a quantum physicist in a toga.
Exactly. And he finishes this one cup, a beautiful caged cup, and he holds it up as the sun is setting. And as the light hits it, the cup just
it transforms. It goes from this murky, swampy green to a glowing blood red. But for him, it's not just a party trick. He feels something, a faint vibration in his hand.
The resonance.
Yeah, he calls it Gothic resonance. He realizes the cup is a sensor. It's a piece of ancient nanotechnology tuned to some kind of energy field that we've completely forgotten about. It reframes the whole idea of what technology is. It's not our invention. It's a rediscovered art.
That's a powerful way to look at it. And the amazing thing is, if you strip away the story of Decimus, the object he's holding is real. It's the Lycurgus Cup, and it's currently in the British Museum.
So let's ground this in reality. Describe the cup. What is it physically?
Okay, so it's what's known as a diatretum, or cage cup, which is already a masterpiece of glasswork. They would take a thick glass blank and then painstakingly grind away all the excess glass to leave this intricate high-relief scene that stands free from the inner cup, connected only by these tiny glass posts.
So the carving itself is a feat of engineering.
Absolutely. The risk of shattering it with one wrong move is immense, and the scene it shows is from mythology. It's King Lycurgus of Thrace. He made the mistake of trying to ban the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine.
A bad move in ancient Greece.
A very bad move. So in retaliation, he's shown being ensnared by these grapevines, driven mad. It's a cautionary tale.
But the real mystery isn't the carving, it's the color.
It's the color. The glass is what we call dichroic, which just means two-colored. If you're standing in a room and you look at it with the light source in front of you, reflecting off the surface, the cup looks like jade. It's this opaque, sort of swampy green.
Okay.
But if you put a light source inside the cup, or shine a light through it from behind, the entire thing changes. It stops being opaque and it glows this brilliant, vibrant ruby red.
And for the longest time, nobody knew why.
Nobody. I mean, the museum acquired it in the 1950s, but the mystery wasn't solved until 1990. We went to the moon before we figured out how a Roman cup worked.
So what did they find in 1990? How did they crack it?
They finally took a shard of it and put it under an electron microscope. And what they found, well, it completely rewrote our understanding of ancient technology. They found that the Roman artisans had impregnated the glass with microscopic particles of gold and silver.
Nanotechnology.
That's the word for it. Pure and simple. We're not talking about gold dust. We're talking about something on a totally different scale.
Okay, so when we say nano, how small are we actually talking about here? Give me a sense of the scale.
All right, imagine a single grain of table salt. That's huge in comparison. The particles in this cup were ground down to a diameter of about 50 nanometers.
50 nanometers. I can't even picture that.
A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. To put it another way, a human hair is about 80,000 to 100,000 nanometers wide. So these particles they're almost unimaginably small. They're smaller than the wavelength of visible light.
Which means they couldn't see them?
They absolutely could not see them. Which leads to the big debate. Was this a total fluke? A lucky accident?
Right. Did someone just spill some gold dust into the furnace and get lucky?
That's the argument from the accidental discovery side. You know, maybe they were using gold and silver leaf to color the glass, and some of it burned off in a very specific way, at a very specific temperature, creating these nanoparticles by chance. A 1 in a million shot.
But there's a strong argument against that, right?
There is, and it comes down to precision. The ratio of gold to silver is very specific. The size of the particles is remarkably consistent. If the particles are too big or too small, you don't get the dichroic effect. You just get a sort of ugly, muddy, brownish color.
So to get that brilliant ruby red, they had to hit this incredibly narrow target.
Which suggests this wasn't an accident. It was a recipe. It was a controlled, repeatable process. They were somehow grinding and measuring materials at a scale that we didn't even know existed until the 20th century. They understood the breadth of stones.
So what's the physics behind it? Why does the color change?
It's a phenomenon called surface plasmon resonance.
Okay, break that down for me.
When light hits a piece of metal, like gold, the electrons in the metal vibrate and just reflect the light back. That's why metal is shiny. But when the metal particle is as small as a nanoparticle, something different happens. The electrons on the surface of the particle start to oscillate, to vibrate in sync with the frequency of the light wave hitting them.
So the light is making them ring like a bell.
And the size of the particle determines the note that it rings at. In the case of the Lycurgus Cup, when light reflects off the front, these vibrating electrons scatter the green part of the light spectrum back at your eye.
So you see green.
You see green. But when the light passes through the glass, the same vibrating electrons absorb the blue and green frequencies and only allow the red frequency to pass through. So they're acting like tiny subatomic light filters.
It's like they're hacking the light itself.
They are. They're manipulating matter at the quantum level to control light. And Roman nobles were just, drinking wine out of it, probably completely unaware of the physics at play.
And the most incredible part is that this isn't just a historical curiosity. We're actually learning from it today.
Oh, this is the best part. The sources we looked at highlight the work of a researcher, Gang Logan Liu at the University of Illinois. He looked at the cup and had this aha moment. He realized that the Romans had built a perfect sensor.
A sensor for what?
For anything, really. The color is dependent on the plasmon resonance, right?
Yeah.
And that resonance is incredibly sensitive to the immediate environment around the nanoparticle. So if you change the liquid that's touching the nanoparticles,
The color should change.
even in subtle ways we might not see with the naked eye. So he basically created a modern version, a plastic plate with millions of tiny wells or nanocups coated with these gold and silver nanoparticles.
And did it work?
It worked better than anyone expected. He put different fluids in it, water, oil, salt solutions, sugar solutions, and he could detect them by the subtle shifts in color. In fact, he found that this 1,600-year-old Roman technique is 100 times more sensitive to changes in salt concentration than the current commercial sensors we use today.
100 times more sensitive.
100 times. So now people are designing handheld devices based on the Lycurgus Cup to detect pathogens in a water supply, or dangerous liquids at an airport, or even to analyze your saliva for early signs of disease. We are literally reverse engineering ancient Roman glass to build our future technology.
It's that idea again. We're not inventing, we're rediscovering. We're just catching up to the ghosts of the past.
It's deeply humbling, isn't it?
Okay, so from nanoscale glass in Rome, let's move forward. Or rather, backward in time, to the coast of Greece around 150 BC. If the cup is nanotech, this next artifact is the world's first analog computer.
The Antikythera Mechanism? Yeah, this one is. This one's the showstopper.
And again, I want to frame this with a bit of a story because the context here, the idea of losing knowledge is so critical.
Let's hear it.
So imagine a scholar, Thalassos, on the island of Rhodes. It's a center for astronomy and math. And he's got this complex bronze device in his hands, but he doesn't see it as the latest, greatest invention. He sees it as an heirloom, a relic. He's turning the crank, watching the gears spin, but he's worried. He sees the world changing, empires rising and falling. He fears what some today would call a reset.
A reset, so a loss of knowledge.
A deliberate one. In this narrative, he believes that the official history is being rewritten, that the calendars are being simplified, and that this higher level of science, what he might think of as Tartarian science, is being intentionally phased out. He's afraid that in a few generations, people will be told that this kind of machine never existed, that they were primitive. So this mechanism to him is the last piece of proof of a truth that's about to be erased.
That's a powerful narrative because it plugs directly into this modern anxiety about phantom time and whether our historical record is reliable.
And before we dive into the Tartaria theory, let's just talk about the object, because the bare facts of the Antikythera Mechanism are stranger than any fiction.
They really are. The discovery itself sounds like a movie plot.
Right.
It's 1901. A group of Greek sponge divers are sheltering from a storm near the tiny island of Antikythera. When the storm passes, they do a dive and stumble upon an ancient Roman shipwreck.
And it was a treasure ship.
Absolutely loaded. Marble and bronze statues, beautiful glassware, jewelry, coins, a massive haul. They brought everything they could to the surface and took it to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens.
And amidst all this incredible art, there was this lump.
Just a corroded, calcified lump of bronze and wood. It looked like a piece of rock that had been fused to a rotten plank. Honestly, it was ugly, so they just sort of tossed it aside in the museum courtyard and forgot about it.
For 2 years.
For 2 years, it just sat there while everyone was busy cleaning the beautiful statues. But as the lump dried out in the sun, it cracked open. And one day, an archaeologist named Valerio Stace was walking past, and he saw something glinting inside the crack.
And it was a gear.
It was a perfectly formed triangular gear tooth. And that shouldn't have been there. Not from a shipwreck for the 1st century BC.
Why not? They had gears, didn't they? For, like, water mills and things.
And simple, large, crude gears. Yes. But this was different. Modern CT scans and X-rays have revealed the mechanism contains at least 30, and possibly as many as 37, individual bronze gears, all meshing together in a complex train. It's clockwork.
And that's where the timeline gets broken.
Completely broken. The level of miniaturization and complexity in this device is something we don't see again in the historical record until the great astronomical clocks built in Europe in the 14th century.
That is a gap of
Over 1,000 years. More like 1,400 years. It's a technological black hole. It's like finding a laptop in a medieval castle. It just doesn't fit the neat, linear progression we're taught.
So what did this impossible machine actually do?
It was a mechanical computer, an analog computer. You turn a hand crank on the side, and that would drive all the gears, which in turn moved a series of pointers on dials on the front and back of the device. It was basically a cosmos in a box.
So it tracked the stars.
It tracked the sun and the moon with incredible accuracy. It could tell you the phase of the moon on any given day. It predicted solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance using something called the Saros cycle.
So it's like a super calendar.
Oh, much more than that. It tracked the Metonic cycle, which is a 19-year cycle used to align the lunar and solar calendars. It even had a dial that tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. It would tell you which year of the Olympiad it was and where the games were being held.
It's an ancient Greek smartphone.
Yeah. But there's one particular piece of engineering inside it that makes modern engineers just shake their heads in disbelief. It's how it models the motion of the moon.
Right, the moon anomaly.
The moon anomaly. So the ancient Greeks knew from observation that the moon's speed appears to change as it moves across the sky. Sometimes it goes a little faster, sometimes a little slower.
Which we now know is because its orbit is an ellipse, not a circle.
Correct. Thanks to Johannes Kepler in the 1600s, we know planets and moons speed up when they're closer to the body they're orbiting. But the Greeks were philosophically committed to the idea of perfect circles in the heavens. Everything had to move at a constant speed in a perfect circle, so they had a real problem. How do you mechanically model a variable speed using only constant speed circular gears?
Yeah, that seems impossible.
The solution they came up with is just breathtakingly clever. They used what's called a pin and slot mechanism. They stacked 2 gears on top of each other, but they offset the center of the top gear slightly. A pin on the driving gear fit into a slot on the driven gear. As they turned, the pin would slide back and forth in the slot, effectively changing the rotational speed of the second gear, causing it to speed up and slow down once per revolution.
So they were faking an elliptical orbit using circles.
They were. They were mechanically modeling Kepler's second law of planetary motion 1,400 years before Kepler was even born. It's genius.
And this level of genius, this huge gap in the timeline, is what fuels theories like the Tartary theory.
It's the perfect fuel for it, yes, because it presents a problem that mainstream history struggles to explain.
So let's get into that. What is the core idea behind the Tartarian Empire theory?
Okay, so this is a theory that's exploded online. The basic premise is that our current version of history is a lie. That not too long ago, maybe as recently as the 18th or 19th century, there was a single global technologically advanced civilization. And this civilization is often referred to as Tartaria, or the Tartarian Empire.
And something happened to it.
Something catastrophic. The theory posits that this civilization was wiped out, or at least buried, by a global cataclysm, usually called the Great Mud Flood.
A mud flood, literally a flood of mud.
Yes. The idea is that some event, maybe natural, maybe not, caused a worldwide liquefaction event that buried the ground floors of their cities in feet, sometimes dozens of feet, of mud and soil.
And the proof for this is in the architecture we see today.
That's the main pillar of the argument. Proponents will point to the grand, ornate, so-called Gilded Age architecture you see all over the world. The U.S. Capitol building, the old World's Fair palaces, the Singer building in New York, and they'll say, look at this. How did people in the 1880s, with horses and carts, build these colossal, intricate stone structures so quickly we'd struggle to build them today?
So the argument is that we didn't build them at all.
Exactly. The theory is we are a post-reset civilization, that we simply found these buildings, dug them out of the mud, and moved in. We're squatters in the ruins of a much greater society.
And they point to things like those basement windows you see on old buildings, right? The ones that are half buried by the sidewalk.
That's the classic mud flood evidence. A historian would tell you that's because cities in the 19th century were constantly raising their street levels to install sewer and gas lines. But a Tartaria theorist will tell you that's the original ground floor of a Tartarian building, buried in the cataclysm.
So how does the Antikythera Mechanism fit into this worldview?
It fits perfectly. Because if you believe there was a reset, then the mechanism isn't a miraculous one-off invention by a lone Greek genius. It's a piece of legacy tech. It's a remnant from the previous more advanced civilization that somehow survived the cataclysm.
So the Greeks just found it the same way we supposedly found the Capitol building.
Precisely. It explains the 1,400-year gap. The technology didn't vanish because of societal collapse. It vanished because the society that made it was wiped from the face of the earth.
Now we have to present the other side. What is the mainstream historical take on Tartaria?
Well, historically speaking, there was no global Tartarian empire. Tartary was a real term used on old European maps, but it was a geographical term, not a political one. It was a vague label for the vast, poorly understood expanse of Central and Northern Asia controlled by various Mongol and Turkic peoples. It wasn't a secret, high-tech global civilization.
And historians would argue that saying people in the 1800s couldn't build those buildings is actually kind of insulting.
It's a form of what some call chronological snobbery. The idea that people in the past were less intelligent or capable than us. The reality is, human beings have always been incredibly resourceful and brilliant. The people who built the pyramids or Chartres Cathedral or the Antikythera Mechanism were just as smart as we are.
So the argument is that absence of evidence isn't evidence of a conspiracy.
That's the skeptical position, yes. But, and this is a really important but, the mystery that fuels the theory is real. That technological gap for the Antikythera Mechanism is real. We really did lose that knowledge. Something happened. Whether you call it a reset or the slow decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the end result is the same. We went backwards.
That concept of lost knowledge is a perfect transition to our next topic. We've talked about light and matter with the cup and mechanics with the gears. Let's talk about a different kind of ancient technology, sound.
Yes. The theory that Gothic cathedrals were actually giant power plants. This is a fascinating rabbit hole.
The core idea is that these massive structures, Chartres, Notre Dame, weren't just designed for worship, they were functional machines.
And it all starts with the science of cymatics.
Can you explain what that is?
Cymatics is basically the study of making sound visible. Imagine you have a thin metal plate and you sprinkle some sand on it. Then you vibrate that plate with a certain frequency, like by drawing a violin bow across the edge. The sand doesn't just bounce around randomly.
It forms patterns.
It snaps into these stunningly complex, beautiful geometric patterns. And every frequency creates its own unique, intricate pattern. They look like snowflakes or mandalas.
And the theory connects this to the rose windows in cathedrals.
Exactly. The idea is that if you look at those huge circular stained glass windows, you're not just looking at a religious symbol, you're looking at a cymatic pattern, a visual representation of a specific sacred frequency or musical note. The window is a blueprint.
A blueprint for what? What was the function of the machine?
Energy harvesting, according to the theory. It works like this. You have a massive sound source, the giant pipe organ, and a full choir creating intense vibrations. The cathedral itself is built from stone like granite or limestone, which has a high quartz content.
And quartz is piezoelectric.
Right, which is a fancy way of saying that if you squeeze it or vibrate it, it generates an electrical charge. So the sound from the organ vibrates the very stones of the cathedral, which then release an electromagnetic energy.
And the shape of the building focuses that energy.
That's the claim. The vaulted ceilings, the pointed arches, the flying buttresses, they aren't just for structural support. They're a geometry designed to amplify and channel that resonant energy upwards towards the spire.
The spire acts as an antenna.
And the metal cross or finial at the very top isn't just a symbol, it's a conductor, designed to draw in or transmit energy to or from the atmosphere, the ether.
There was a really specific comparison in the sources we looked at between the layout of a cathedral and a modern magnetron.
Right, the magnetron is the device in your microwave oven that creates the microwaves. Yeah. And if you look at a diagram of one, it's a central cathode with these radiating resonant cavities around it. The floor plan of a Gothic cathedral's apse, with its central altar and radiating chapels, looks eerily similar.
So under this theory, the whole religious purpose was a cover story to protect the power plant.
That's the extreme version of the theory, yes. You tell people it's the house of God so they'll maintain it and revere it and not ask too many questions about why the stones hum during high mass.
So what's the more grounded, skeptical interpretation of all this?
The more sober take is that it is a form of technology, but it's a psychological technology, not an electrical one.
What do you mean by that?
The builders of these cathedrals were masters of acoustics. They absolutely designed these spaces to resonate in specific ways. But the goal wasn't to power a light bulb. It was to power a spiritual experience. The low-frequency infrasound from a massive pipe organ has a measurable physical effect on the human body. It can vibrate your internal organs. It can induce feelings of awe, reverence, even fear.
Balancing the air, as one source put it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You take a peasant from the 13th century who lives in a tiny, dark mud and wattle hut, and you bring them into a space like Chartres. The light is pouring through the colored glass, the ceiling soars hundreds of feet above them, and then the organ hits a note that literally shakes their skeleton. They're not just hearing God, they're feeling God. That is a very powerful technology for social control and spiritual connection.
It doesn't have to be electrical energy to be a powerful technology.
Yep.
Manipulating human consciousness is just as advanced.
I think so. But let's shift from these grand theoretical technologies to something more tangible. Let's talk about specific materials and recipes that we know existed and that we know we lost.
At the top of that list has to be Damascus steel.
Absolutely. This was the stuff of legend during the Crusades. The European knights, with their heavy, brittle iron swords, were terrified of it. The blades used by the Islamic warriors were different. They had this distinctive, watery, flowing pattern on the surface.
And they had properties that seemed magical.
The stories are incredible, that a blade could cut a piece of silk in half as it fell through the air. But the real magic was its combination of hardness and flexibility. In metallurgy, those two things are usually opposites. If something is very hard, it holds a sharp edge, but it's brittle, it will shatter. If it's flexible, it won't break, but it's soft and won't hold an edge.
And Damascus steel was both.
It was both. You could bend it nearly 90 degrees and it would spring back to true, and it held a legendarily sharp edge.
And then we just lost it.
We did. Sometime around the 1700s, the technique for making it just vanished. The secret was in the crucible steel, called wootz steel, that was imported from India. For whatever reason, that supply chain dried up, and the specific knowledge of how to forge it died out. For centuries, we could study the original blades, but we couldn't replicate them.
Until very recently, when we found something inside the steel at the molecular level.
Carbon nanotubes?
Like the super strong futuristic material.
The very same. Scientists examining an authentic Damascus blade with an electron microscope discovered that the unique forging process, the repeated heating and cooling, and possibly the addition of specific organic matter like wood or leaves to the crucible, actually catalyzed the formation of carbon nanotubes and nanowires within the steel's matrix.
So they were accidentally creating nanotechnology in a medieval forge.
That's exactly what was happening. These nanotubes were reinforcing the steel at the atomic level, giving it that impossible combination of strength and flexibility. They didn't know why it worked, but they knew that it worked. They had the recipe.
It's the same pattern. The ancients had the practical application, and we're just now catching up with the scientific theory to explain it.
And sometimes the practical application is so mind-boggling we still can't explain it. Which brings us to Sacsayhuaman in Peru.
The massive Inca site near Cusco.
This place defies conventional explanation. We're talking about a fortress or temple built with polygonal limestone blocks. Some of these blocks weigh over 100 tons. One of the largest is estimated at 125 tons.
And they're not just rough-hewn blocks. The joinery is insane.
It's perfect. There's no mortar. The stones are cut and fitted together so precisely with so many complex angles that you can't slip a piece of paper between them. It's like a giant 100-ton jigsaw puzzle.
How did they move a 125-ton block, let alone shape it with that kind of precision? The Inca didn't have wheeled vehicles.
That is the multi-million-dollar question, and there are some wild theories. The most persistent one, based on local legends, is that they had a method to temporarily soften the stone.
Soften stone.
The idea is that they knew of a plant, or a combination of plants, whose juices could turn the surface of the rock into a kind of clay or putty. They could then mold the stone into a perfect fit against its neighbor, and it would later reharden. It would explain why the stones have this slightly pillowy, rounded look, as if they were pressed into place.
Is there any scientific basis for that?
Not that we've been able to reproduce, but when you stand there and look at it, the mainstream explanation of lots of patient people with stone hammers and bronze chisels just feels inadequate. It feels like we're missing a key part of the process.
And a lot of it was destroyed, wasn't it?
It was. After the conquest, the Spanish used it as a quarry. They dismantled the upper levels of the walls to build their own churches and houses in Cusco. We're only seeing the foundations of whatever was originally there.
It's a recurring theme. Destruction through ignorance, like with the stone spheres of Costa Rica.
Oh, another great mystery. Hundreds of almost perfectly spherical balls of stone, mostly granodiorite, scattered through the jungles of Costa Rica. Some are small, some are huge, up to 2 meters in diameter and weighing 15 tons.
And we have no idea why they were made.
No clue. Astronomical markers, symbols of status. But we do know what happened to a lot of them. In the 1930s, when fruit companies were clearing the land for banana plantations, workers kept finding these spheres, and a rumor started that they had gold hidden inside them. Yep. They drill holes in these perfect ancient sculptures stuck in dynamite and blew them to pieces. And of course, they found nothing but solid rock. Another piece of history just gone, vandalized for a myth.
Breaking. And it's similar to another lost recipe, another state secret, Greek fire.
The superweapon of the Byzantine Empire. This was a naval weapon, basically an early flamethrower. They had ships equipped with bronze siphons that would spray a sticky, burning liquid onto enemy ships.
And it was terrifyingly effective.
It was a weapon of pure terror, because water couldn't put it out. In fact, all the accounts say that throwing water on it only made it burn hotter and more intensely. It would just float on the surface of the sea, clinging to the wooden hulls of ships and burning them down to the waterline. It saved Constantinople on more than one occasion.
So why don't we have the formula?
Extreme secrecy. It was a state secret of the highest order. The formula was known only to the emperor and a single family of chemists who were entrusted with its production. The knowledge was so compartmentalized that when that family line died out or the empire fell into chaos, the recipe was lost forever. We have educated guesses, naphtha, quicklime, sulfur, pine resin, but we've never been able to perfectly replicate it.
This brings us full circle, back to the inventor of flexible glass. We've talked about knowledge that was lost by accident or forgotten over time. Now we have to confront the most disturbing category, knowledge that was deliberately suppressed.
This is where the story of Tiberius stops being a historical anecdote and starts being a modern parable.
Let's go back to that moment. The inventor has just hammered the dent out of his unbreakable glass bowl. He's looking up at the emperor, expecting a reward. He's an innovator. He thinks he's done a great service to the world.
He believes in progress for progress's sake.
But Tiberius isn't an innovator. He's a system administrator. He's in charge of the Roman economy, which is based on the perceived value and scarcity of precious metals like gold and silver. And in that moment, he sees that this one invention would render gold and silver worthless. It would collapse the entire economic system.
So the execution isn't an act of random cruelty. It's a calculated act of economic self-preservation. To protect the system, you have to destroy the disruption.
And you see this exact logic play out again and again, even in our own time. A perfect example is cold fusion.
1989. Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons. And it's important to remember, these were not fringe scientists. Fleischmann was a world-renowned electrochemist. They held a press conference and announced they had achieved nuclear fusion in a jar on their lab bench.
Which, if true, is the flexible glass of our era. It means limitless, cheap, clean energy from seawater. It would fundamentally change human civilization overnight.
It would end poverty, end wars over oil. But the reaction from the scientific establishment wasn't just skepticism, which would have been healthy. It was immediate, overwhelming hostility.
They were branded as heretics.
Or worse, they were branded as frauds. When other labs couldn't immediately and easily replicate their results, the conclusion wasn't, this is a complex phenomenon we don't understand yet. The conclusion was they lied.
And the sources we looked at talked about this idea of poisoning well.
That's the key tactic of suppression. It wasn't just about discrediting Fleischmann and Pons. It was about making the entire field of research so toxic, so radioactive, that no other serious scientist would dare touch it for fear of career suicide. You couldn't even apply for a grant to study anomalous heat and palladium without being laughed out of the room. It set the field back by decades.
We saw a small echo of it just recently with the LK99 superconductor claim. The internet exploded with hope, and the establishment came down on it like a ton of bricks. There's a fine line between scientific rigor and protecting the status quo.
There is. And you can't have this conversation without bringing up the ultimate icon of suppressed innovation, Nikola Tesla.
And specifically, his Wardenclyffe Tower project.
This was his grand vision, a tower on Long Island that wouldn't just transmit messages, but would transmit electrical power wirelessly to anywhere on the globe.
Free energy for everyone.
That was the dream. And he had the backing of one of the most powerful men in the world, the financier J.P. Morgan. The tower was being built, and then suddenly the funding was pulled.
The story goes that Morgan finally understood what Tesla is truly trying to do and asked him one simple question.
Where do we put the meter?
And Tesla had no answer, because you can't put a meter on energy that's broadcast freely through the air.
And that was the end of it. J.P. Morgan had invested heavily in copper mines, in the infrastructure of the wired electrical grid. Tesla's invention, while brilliant for humanity, would have made Morgan's entire empire obsolete overnight. It's the Tiberius logic, 1900 years later.
And the tower was torn down and sold for scrap.
And Tesla, one of the greatest minds in history, died broke and alone. It's the ultimate cautionary tale. A technology's survival depends not on its brilliance, but on its compatibility with the existing power structure.
So when we look at all this, is it really a grand conspiracy? Is there a shadowy group actively suppressing free energy?
I think it's usually something more mundane and maybe more insidious. It's what you could call institutional inertia. Large established systems, whether they're economic or scientific, are inherently resistant to change. A new technology that provides free energy isn't just a threat to oil companies. It's a threat to the entire geopolitical order, the banking system, everything.
So it's not one villain killing the inventor, it's the entire system almost unconsciously working to reject the organ that it can't assimilate.
Or it's scientific dogma. The experts who ignored the Antikythera Mechanism for years because it was too advanced to be real, they weren't part of a conspiracy. They were just blinded by their own preconceptions of what was possible. They couldn't see the truth because it didn't fit their model of history.
It's a profound thought that our own certainty about the world can be the biggest obstacle to understanding it. We've gone from nanotech in a Roman cup to a Greek computer, to cathedrals as resonant machines, to lost recipes and suppressed inventors. The one common thread is that our perception of history as a simple upward line is completely wrong.
It's a fantasy. Knowledge is fragile. It can be lost. The reset theories, whether you take them literally with mud floods or metaphorically, get that one thing right. The burning of the Library of Alexandria was a reset. The fall of Rome was a reset. We are always just one disaster, one economic decision, one act of suppression away from becoming the ancients ourselves.
It really forces you to be skeptical of our own modern arrogance. We think we're at the peak, but we might just be rediscovering things that were common knowledge to people thousands of years ago.
We have to remain open to the idea that the past was far more complex and far more advanced than we give it credit for.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought, something to really think about that brings all of this home. That story of the flexible glass inventor, it ends with an execution to save the economy. It forces us to ask a difficult question about our own time. If someone walked into a patent office today with a device that provided infinite free energy but would instantly collapse the global economy, crashing the dollar, the stock market, the energy sector, would they be given a Nobel Prize? Or would they suffer the same fate as the man in Tiberius's court?
That is the question.
Stay curious.